Welcome, everyone. My name is Jack Tchen. I'm the director of the Clemente Price Institute at Rutgers at Newark. I'm honored to have that position in memory of course, Clemente Price, who was known to everyone at Rutgers University, but also New Jersey and beyond New Jersey. I'm really delighted that you can join us today on a Thursday early evening, late afternoon. We did this so that we could make sure that our friends from around the country and around the world could join us at a good time. I wanted to first say that I hope you're all well. We're doing this, of course, on Zoom during a time of great difficulty, great challenges. And I hope you're able to take good care of yourselves and your loved ones. It's been a really stressful, precarious time, but also a time of enormous possibilities. We've had an enormous response to this conference. Over the 4 segments, we will have over 400 people joining us. We're really delighted about that. We think it's a good indication of the need to grapple with both the issues of climate change and global warming, and also, of course, the related issues of racial equity, racial injustice, and climate justice. These are not simple questions to grapple with, but we're hoping that this conference will create a space in which that could begin to happen. You're listening to the music as we were coming in, courtesy of the Hip Hop Caucus. They have done this fantastic album called Home, which has been specifically focused on fighting global warming and bringing about climate justice. And we'll post that link so all of you can also enjoy that album. And Reverend Yearwood will be joining us tomorrow. Now, I wanted to say a few words first about the word hack. I think a lot of people were surprised that we're doing a university conference with that term. And I thought it would be useful to kind of reference really the different meanings of the word hack. One of them has to do really with, of course, the English enclosures that were happening from the 1600s onwards, in which the lands that were shared by the peasants and the people who were working the land started being closed off. And those who had been freedmen were increasingly pushed into jobs of labor for the monarchies and for the aristocracies that were increasingly privatizing the land. So one of the references to hack that I think is actually quite suggestive is in 1620, in which it was said that one good hacker, being a lusty laborer, will at good ease hack or cut more than half an acre of ground in a day. So with that meaning in the context of the enclosures that are happening and really the cutting down of forests and the creation of landscapes, we get this sense of really a point of view in which the person who's being called a hack is really a laborer, a male laborer who is complimented for how efficient he can be in terms of the quantity of land he's able to hack and begin to clear. And of course, that question raises a point of view, because it's really those who are employing the labor, who are hiring the labor, who are kind of pushing this person into a position where they have to move from being free labor, acting on their own behalf, to really working for the boss of the manor, for the head of the manor, for the Lord. So this question of who's hacking who is actually critical. And is the hacker also able to save some of that wood or some of those goods for themselves? Are they able to hack the hack? And it makes me think of the work of historian Jill Lepore in her book, New York Burning, in which she describes the enslaved people having moments in which they're able to go outside the wall of Wall Street that they had built and to find some space in which they could rejoin family members who were taken apart, torn apart in the different masters that they served. That little furtive space that people could find to work outside of the normal rhythms of enslaved life. And that really brings me to one of the thinkers who had, two thinkers who had kind of inspired this conference, Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, who wrote a book called The Undercommons, in which they talk about the furtive space of Black study at universities, but also in other places, in which people who have been excluded and pushed to the margins of these institutions. We certainly know about how the elite colonial universities were set up, and how African Americans were not included in them other than as laborers, other than as the sources of really money that could be raised and traded to support these universities. So that when Moten and Harney talk about fugitive Black study, they're talking about how there's always been a fugitive relationship of people of color, of those without power, those being enclosed onto the margins of the established institutions of the rising society. So this undercommons, or this fugitive space, has really been there. We can talk about that, and we will talk about that, in a way that creates this unresolved relationship between who is considered the hacker, hacking on behalf of the Lord, but also who is the hacker in terms of how they're able to, who that hacker is and their ability to, in some ways, hack back and save some of their labor, some of the fruits of their labor for themselves and for their families and for their communities. Again, this question of point of view is important if we're to skip ahead and look at questions of scientific racism, how they've operated in the university, how racial hierarchies have been taught and part and parcel of how universities have actually operated. So it's really not a long jump to go from the enclosures in many ways to the ways in which classification systems of races of mankind were taught and reproduced in universities and the institutions such as museums and other institutions in our society, and how the very notion of intelligence itself has been inculcated. So I'll just introduce a friend of mine. It's Mr. Phrenology, who many of you probably recognize. And Mr. Phrenology is someone who really I just offer as a museum exhibit that we can link into in terms of how notions of intelligence were speculated and theorized and researched in all sorts of ways. Of course, we're at a very different point now, and in other ways we're not. So this conference is really a way of trying to examine, open up space at a public institution about how we can begin to understand global warming and the ways in which racial equity and social injustice have unfurled at the same time that the society is grappling with the pandemic that's going on, but also with the global warming conflagrations that are happening all around us. So I'm not gonna go on further. We'll have a chance to have some discussion shortly after this, but it's my privilege now to introduce our first hacker. The person I thought of immediately, who's been very influential for my thinking and my work, is actually Wayne Yang. But before we get to that, we're going to be blessed by Brent Stonefish, who is a friend and colleague coming to us from Ontario, Canada. So Brent, please offer your blessing. Thank you very much for joining us.
Quinganao Lomwa, Ni de Shinzi Achkok Paposit, Dami Minti Tequach, Ni Nonjai Alnapawi Lahkèewiit, Ndilnapawi, Anishika Kishalamokwang Alamilian Yon Kwai Kishkwik. Nishi Kishalamokwang Alamilian Walamaliswak in Wak Newikian Wak Michwakan. Say Nishik to Kishalamokwang, the one who thought us into existence. My name is Brent Stonefish. I'm Turtle Clan from Eelūnaapèewi Lahkèewiit, which means Delaware Nation or Lenape Nation here in Ontario, Canada. This is where we've settled in 1792 after our forced removal from where Rutgers University now resides in Newark and Manhattan in the homeland. And so at this time, I've been asked to offer just a few words of blessing, a few words of to get things started for your conference and the symposium over the next couple of days. And so I decided that I would offer a smudge. I got my trusty old little torch here, and then a sage stick. And one of the traditions that we usually do is that usually we smudge. We smudge our eyes so that we can see good things. We smudge our ears so that we can hear good things. And we smudge our nose so that we can smell good things. And we smudge our mouth so that we can speak good things. And they say that the reason we did that is to remind us that we have 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 2 nostrils, so that we can hear, smell, and see twice as much as that we speak. That we come to these types of gatherings with a good mind, and that we speak in a good way. And that one of the things that we do at this time is we will offer what we call tobacco. So I have tobacco in my hand, and we offer that to Kishalamokwang, the one who thought us into existence, and to the land that this institution sits on, the land of my ancestors, the Lenape, that we once flourished in that area, and that we once they would say that if you stood on the tallest mountain in that area, that if you looked in all directions, to the south, to the north, to the east, that any fire that you could see belonged to the Lenape people before contact. And so it's that territory that this discussion is happening, that this conversation of hacking the university is coming from. And so we offer that sema to those ancestors that are still there, that are still in that area. We offer that sema to creation. We offer to the sema to the waters. We offer the sema to the plants, to the minerals, to all the winged ones, and to all the creepy crawlers, and to all the fish, to all those different creatures that roam, and all those different beings that reside in that area. We offer that sema to them to listen to us and to help us in our discussion, so that we may speak good things and that we may make positive change for that area, for Mother Earth, that we are acknowledging Mother Earth and that everything that she gives us as human beings. Because before we were created, creation had a great council, and they sat with Kishalamokwang, and they expressed to Kishalamokwang what they would give us as human people, what they would give us so that we could sustain, so that we could have shelter, so that we could have clothing, so that we could have good health and good long life and peace of mind. And before we were even created, they said what they would give us. And the one thing that they asked of us was that we always acknowledge them and that we give them the respect that they deserve, and that we work with them in reciprocity and create good relations with them. And so as we go through this procedure, where we go through this whole 3 days of this hacking the university, we keep that in mind, and that we're not only talking to each other as human beings, but we're also talking to the rest of creation and to those ancestors of the Lenape that are on that land. So we ask them to be a part of that conversation. We ask them to give us what it is that we need and to fulfill us in all in mind, body, and spirit. And so that we may come after the 3 days, we may come out of this renewed with more energy and a better sense of ourselves and how we are a part of creation and not separate from. And so for the last thing I will do is once we're done here, I will take this sema and I will put this out by a tree on my property here, this new home where my community is, and give that to creation and give that to our ancestors and say Anishik for the work that they continue to do on our behalf. So I'll put that down for now. And then the last thing that I will do before you get on with the program is part of our creation story. It says that when Kishala, the one who thought us into existence, was alone at the beginning of time, and she had a vision, and they said that she sent her thoughts out in all directions, in all spaces, in the darkness. And as those thoughts came back to Kishala, they came back at the sound that the shaker makes. And so when we use the shaker in our ceremonies, is to simulate Kishala first vision of the universe, first vision of us as human people and of the earth. So it's to connect us to spirit. So as we go forward, we'll connect to spirit. And so I'm just going to sing one verse of Lenape song. What must say Anishik, oh hey, oh. What must say Anishik, oh hey, oh. So we say Anishik to Potamose, the one who thought the one we pray to, and Kishala Mokwang, the one who thought us into existence. And I ask that we have a very good conversation and a very good gathering over these new virtual means for hacking the university. So I say Anishik on behalf of myself and my ancestors, Lenape, that once called New Jersey and New York our home. Anishik.
Thank you, Brent. Really appreciate that. The whole story of enclosure, of course, is also a story of settler colonialism and of the dispossession of this region into the spaces that we now think of as the New Jersey, New York, Connecticut metropolitan region. Without any further delay, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Wayne Yang, Provost of John Muir College in San Diego, State University of California. He has been the author of many pieces of very important writing about decolonizing our practices and institutions. And the one in particular that is on the reading list that you can see the link to is that of A Third University as Possible. Wayne, thank you so much for joining us. And he will be giving the first hack, and President Jonathan Holloway will then respond, and then we'll have a conversation at which time Brent Stonefish will also be joining us. Wayne Yang.
Thank you, Jack, for the kind introduction. I'm humbled to be part of this conference, and it's especially an honor to be in conversation with President Holloway today. It's hard to speak without urgency, without alarm creeping into my voice. It's also hard to speak at a screen, and I have to imagine all the people, all the hearts at the other end of this transmission. I'll start by saying I am a university administrator. I'm the provost of a college named after John Muir, who founded the National Park System, and in doing so, displaced indigenous peoples from 85 million acres of homeland. John Muir also founded the Sierra Club, whose president recently came out against their own legacy of racist exclusion, anti-immigrant advocacy, and connections to racial eugenics. The massive wildfires right now in California, I actually have a colleague who is in the National Forest System and who's been on fire duty. And she told me that out of the 23 forests in California, 18 of them are on fire. This, as we know, is largely a result of global warming, but is also the result of John Muir's policies of conservation, which have allowed the forest to become overgrown in the past 100 years, compared to the careful stewardship that indigenous peoples conducted of the forest when they were just called home. And in that note, I'd like to acknowledge ocean to ocean that I am calling from Kumeyaay land. This is the land of what's now called San Diego area, but also Tijuana, Mexico, Ensenada, Mexico. We're calling to the other ocean, the Atlantic, to Muncie Lenape land. And I hope that what I have to say today is the right relationship to both these oceans and all of these lands. Like all administrators at this time, I'm very busy. I'm very busy trying to save the university in this time of pandemic and budget deficits, attacks on critical race theory, attacks on higher education. We're also trying to save this university, which is in effect trying to save capitalism. And capitalism does not love you. And let's also say that this university probably does not love you. And this is all the more apparent for Native students when attending a college with our namesake. So to quote Black feminist poet and writer independent scholar Alexis Pauline Gumbs, she says, "The university was not created to save my life. The university is not about the preservation of a bright brown body. The university will use me alive and use me dead. The university does not intend to love me. The university does not know how to love me. The university, in fact, does not love me, but the universe does." And yet the universe does love you. And that is the fundamental difference between an imperial university and a decolonizing one. You, the possibility that we are working for the universe, we are responding to her calls, and we are choosing for the time that we are here in the university to rework this machine called the university. We are hacking the university. Hacking the university is not a critique of the university. It is a pragmatic surgery on it. It is a reconfiguration of its parts. It is a kick-ass mod that will suddenly do some decolonizing work, at least for one machine cycle. And it is about connecting to other similarly decolonizing machines within the machine, within these machines. What is this machinery of the university? It's quite vast, right? It is a machine that is connected to others, such as the machine of finance. The university is connected to Department of Defense contracts, to big pharmaceuticals, to legislation, to private industry. And locally, if you have a bricks and mortar university like ours, we're connected to transit, we're connected to redevelopment, to small businesses, to vendors. The university is a machine that operates at really intimate scales, such as individual student grades and conduct policies and classrooms, but also at systemic scales, such as state legislation, funding, investments. It is also a machine with history. And Rutgers is probably unique in its history in that it was the big three moments in history. It was a colonial chartered college, then it was a private land grant institution, and now it is a public university. So colonial college means it was one of the 9 original colleges from the period of the 13 British colonies. And as such, it was built by slavery, built by the labor of enslaved people, but also by the buying and selling of people. So slavery was never just about labor. It was the whole trade of people like stocks and bonds. And I always find it an ironic similarity to how stocks and bonds have double meanings to refer to chains and cages. You can be certain that the early graduates of these colonial colleges were connected to empire and racial capitalism all around the world. Land grant universities, and I'm at one, are those that benefited from the theft of indigenous lands and their speculation, the buying and selling of lands. So we often think about land grant universities as simply the land that the university is built upon, but actually universities owned, bought, and sold tracts of land all around the country, much the same way people buy and trade stocks and bonds. There's actually an excellent project going on right now called land grab universities. You can look up the first time I came across it was this excellent article on High Country News. But within this comparison, I think we see echoes between the speculative economies of indigenous Africans' bodies as property and of indigenous lands as property. And this is built into the machinery of university founding, financing, and expansion. As public universities, I also work at one of those, we are intimately wrapped up in growing the economy, growing technology. We are also land developers. We are military institutes. We are agribusiness institutes. We are pharmaceutical institutes. We are legal institutes. We are not just places of education and research. We are places of applied work, of commerce, of capitalism. So the university is a machine connected to other machines, historical, present, and future. But this connection to machines is exactly why the university is worth hacking. So who are the hackers? Well, if you're tuning in to Hacking University, I would hope and guess that you know there is something wrong with the university, and yet you also know there is something possible. You are a very pragmatic person. You are probably involved with or thinking about being involved with the university for pragmatic reasons, such as for a degree, for a job, or maybe for some benefit to your community, or for decolonization, which is a very practical project. You might also think of yourself as a hacker. And so you and we who have a relationship to university, we are actually part of the wiring. We are wires of this machine, even though we're human and organic. It's because we're part of the university wiring, we can rewire it, we can hotwire it, we can hack it, and we do it all the time. The question is, what do we do it for? And in this respect, we're very cyborg. We're part of this machine as much as it is part of us. So the question is, can we use our cyborg abilities for the universe, for decolonizing purposes, to forward Black, queer, and indigenous futures? And I'd really like us to think about, can we be the leaders in climate change solutions? Can we solve this existential threat to the planet? And to draw on this as a metaphor, I want to think about how can individuals, personal, small collectives become hack into larger systems like the university. And I'm going to draw from who I think is the ultimate hacker in American literature, which is R2-D2 in Star Trek. And if you're familiar with R2-D2, you remember that scene where the droid is in the Death Star and plugs into this giant death machine and starts opening escape doors for people, starts turning off tractor beams so they can flee. And R2-D2 at that moment is no longer a single droid. It is now the entire system. It is turned into the death machine itself, and it's making it run backwards, right? So ultimately, R2-D2 actually contains the very plans for the destruction of the Death Star. So we think Luke Skywalker blew up the Death Star. Actually, Luke Skywalker was just part of R2-D2's plan, right? So, but the other interesting thing about this is in that Death Star, there's all these other droids who could be doing the same thing. But instead, they're busy keeping the Death Star running. So what makes R2-D2 so different from the other droids? And I will say not very much. The only difference is that R2-D2 has a decolonial heart and has decolonial friends. R2-D2 loves the universe. So this metaphor of hacking is great because when you think about hacking, you think about viruses and how viruses are very, very small, and yet they scale at the level of the organism or at the level of networks or the level of entire biological communities, as we see now in terms of the current corona COVID-19 virus, right? So imagine R2-D2 then as an organism or cyborg that is able to jump scales from very personal scales to jumping to scales of Death Stars to the scale of the resistance. And by this idea of scale jumping and scale, I'm drawing from indigenous feminist writers such as Laura Harjo, Muskogee scholar Laura Harjo, who writes about Muskogee youth organizers who can jump scale from the personal to the level of their community, to organizations, to the level of their nation, to the level of state, to go to the international even, to argue on behalf of indigenous sovereignty, right? That ability to move up and down between the personal and these very, very large structures is scale jumping. Another person who writes about this is the Cree scholar, artist, and writer Karen Recollet, who's at the University of Toronto. And she basically says, in this ability to jump scale is actually a hope and a prayer for the future. I'd like us to think about how we can become the scale jumpers for climate solutions. Right now at my university, we have created a very, very small summit called Climate Solution Summit. We have everyone from the Southern Tribal Councils for Native Health Councils that are looking at adaptations to climate, but also solutions to climate. We have the San Diego Thorium Alliance, which is trying to advocate for using thorium to create molten salt reactors, which then could be shipped on boats around the world and provide cheap and clean electricity for all around the planet. We're talking to the people doing transit work for our entire metropolitan area in terms of their climate solutions. Normally, we're taught to think about climate solutions at the personal level as only stop driving your car, right? And in fact, what we need is for everyone to be involved in at least one climate solution and to be scale jumping, to try to push that to your legislation, to your institutions, and further. Another thing, check out our website. It's called climatesolutionscollective.org. And it's there's one on the Green New Deal for the University of California system. And it basically takes on this idea that the university is not simply an educational institution. It is an institution of a bricks and mortar institution that uses gas and electricity and has a carbon footprint. So how do we decarbonize our own institutions? Now, taking this to our scale, our cyborg scale, scale jumping, what if all our institutions, Rutgers, wherever you're phoning in from on this call, we all start presenting our climate solutions and we make up for this lack of leadership throughout this, in our current crisis nationally. So having said that, I'm going to end with this idea that universities are practical machines, right? They're not just political machines. They're not just ideological and philosophically based. They are practical. And that we as hackers, we do practical work. And we can take over this machine, even if only for a cycle, to present and scale solutions, in this case, climate solutions. I'd like to just stop with a reflection on Audre Lorde. I know she says that the master's schools can never dismantle the master's house. And here we are talking about the master's house, and quite literally in the case of colonial colleges, and hacking them. And yet we are the master's tools, and you on this line are the master's tools. And I would argue you are not just the master's tools. You are your own tool, and you have a deep colonial heart. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Provost Wayne Yang. Now we have the privilege of having the new president at Rutgers University, Jonathan Holloway, who agreed to respond to this first hack. President Holloway, thank you for doing that. Let me just point out that for the biographies of everybody, you can go to the program. So I'm not going to be spending much time introducing people to just maximize the chance for people to respond. Jonathan Holloway.
Thank you very much. You know, when Professor Tchen invited me to Hacking the University, I thought it was a very exciting idea, and I was wondering, hoping I could fit it onto my calendar. Clearly I have. I didn't quite understand at the time that I would be responding on the fly to a comment, which this is what he wanted. He said from the beginning, I hadn't processed that. So I've been scrambling to write notes while listening to Provost Professor Yang's comments. One of the great challenges I find in this moment is what does one do in crafting a comment when, as I was listening to Professor Yang offer his presentation, camera was off, and I'm nodding my head and agreeing, like, yeah, that's right, that's right, that's right. You don't want to hear me simply just say that's right. And Professor Yang deserves more of something of substance in that regard. So understanding, or I hope that you understand where I'm coming from a standpoint of allyship and an alliance with so much of what he just presented to us, let me offer the following thoughts. And these are, well, we'll see where this goes over the next 7 or 8 minutes. I wanted to start actually with Jack Tchen's introduction to the whole conference, that he offered this critical, complicating, and historicizing. He brought us to the term hack, and that he's using it in a very different way than I certainly understood from the very beginning. And I think that was just a fantastic way to demonstrate that what is familiar in one moment may have actually deep and unsettling currents in it for a very different moment. That's what great scholarship, in this case, great historian, does. So I'm grateful for that. And he, I felt, invited, just as Professor Yang did, invited us to talk about labor and thinking about what a hack is and who is hacking who. And I want to, I'm so tempted to tell a very long story. I don't have the time to do so, but it's a story I've told many times about a headstone rubbing that hangs in my office about an individual named John Jack, not his birth name, someone who's born in Africa, free person who's enslaved and comes over to colonial New England. Again, it's a story I've told many times, and it's the headstone rubbing is dated March 1773 when he died. And it's a story about belonging or not belonging, and freedom and slavery, and who can be a citizen in this case colonial New England, Concord, Massachusetts, in colonial New England, when John Jack, who had been enslaved, petitioned for his, bought his freedom, petitioned for citizenship, and was denied by the citizens, the male property owners. He was a male property owner, but they didn't care because he had been enslaved at one point. John Jack was, to really extend the metaphor to Professor Yang's comment, he was trying to hack the system to be recognized as a citizen, but the citizens denied him, blind to the fact that they were complaining to the English crown about being slaves themselves to a different kind of system. So much of the narrative of, in this case, Blackness, Africanity in New England, colonial New England, so much of that narrative transcends times and take us to the founding of Black studies, takes us to the founding of all these other so-called area studies, areas of scholarship that have been considered certainly outside of the center and even beyond the periphery for a very long time. We need to listen to the stories that John Jack has told us, that Jack Tchen has told us, that Wayne Yang has told us as well. When I tell the story about John Jack now, again, he passed away in 1773, I point out the fact that this is a Rutgers story as well. Now, he didn't live in what is now Rutgers in that area, but since the university, as Professor Yang rightly pointed out, was established as a colonial college, 1766, this long history where we need to ask questions about who belongs in a place, who has a voice, who has the means of control, is something that we need to always be thinking of, especially for people who are employed at one of these colonial colleges, such as I am and Jack Tchen is as well. And I know he's thinking about this all the time. So moving on then to Professor Yang's really elegant commentary. And the elegance is not just for the idea itself that he was expressing, but for the way, I think, for an interdisciplinary scholar, it was a great model of moving across different kinds of vernaculars to make this larger point. If you told me at the beginning of this talk that I would be listening to, and I never thought about it this way, this what pop culture reference to R2-D2 and who is in the machine and who isn't the machine, and that it would make sense to have Audre Lorde in that conversation, and other names I confess I lost in writing these notes down, but critical inquiry, moving across multiple spaces. This is a model that for those of you who might be at earlier stages in your career, follow that model. That was quite impressive. So I have nothing but praise for the execution of the talk. Now, so much of what the talk was about, of course, was decolonizing the university. And here I completely agree with Professor Yang in terms of when he broke down who is the university for, how it fit into a certain sort of larger structure in an evolving country, and really asked or demonstrated, I think, laid out very clearly the complex space in which a university resides in terms of, you know, being being sort of the machine, being the machine, and of course the type of university you are really indicates or delineates the extent to your involvement in structures of corporations, capitalism, military-industrial complex, etc. I actually want to tell a story that's a UC San Diego story. Prior to this going live, I didn't have the chance to tell Professor Yang that I started my career at UC San Diego, the first 5 years of my teaching career. And there's a story from I'm telling the story of an individual that has stayed with me that speaks to the core of what I think, or speaks to part of what Professor Yang was talking about. I don't know if this is still going on, but when I was there, there was a Friday afternoon group called the Campus Black Forum, when faculty, staff, and students would gather. I'm forgetting the name of the space now. I may not even be there anymore. This was 25 years ago. They would gather on Friday afternoon. We would gather Friday afternoon at 5 and just check in. It was essentially group therapy. And on this one occasion, this young man, Clifford Marks, and I say this intentionally, a very dark-skinned young man, is a senior, a biology major, and was always incredibly put together with his Air Jordans and his wristbands. I mean, he had it all together. This one day, we're in a meeting, and a first-year student was clearly having a bad day, and one of the facilitators asked her what was going on. And she said, "I'm sick and tired," a Black woman, "I'm sick and tired of walking into what I'll simply call Biology 101. I don't know the name of the class, one of the big amphitheaters on campus. I'm tired of walking into that class and having everybody turn and look at me." Now, this is a moment in the University of California history when Ward Connerly was rising in power and influence, and the state was aggressively rolling back affirmative action plans, and we saw the number of African-American students plummet. And it was shocking. We know that the percentages of Black faculty at major research universities flutter around 3%, broadly speaking. Percentage of Black undergraduates went below 2% during that time. It was really quite a shocking collapse. So this is the context in this student speaking. And she said, "I've had it. I'm tired of people looking at me like as if I don't belong." And Clifford said something I've never forgotten, because I remember that class. I was in that class. And I remember walking in and everybody turning and looking at me when I walked down the steps. He goes, "And I just presumed it's because I looked especially fine that day." Now, he said that in jest. He understood exactly what the logics were that suggested his appearance was illogical to the students in that classroom, but he refused to buy into their illogics. And what I heard is part of what Professor Yang was talking about, that even in the complex machinery of a university, a place like UC San Diego specific, a place like Rutgers, that there is an opportunity as well. And that's the opportunity for the hackers. And in this case, Clifford Marks was hacking the racial realities of maybe organic chemistry, something like that, and refusing to abide by others' disbelief that he belonged there. And I really do believe that students, staff, and faculty have important roles to play. Even presidents, believe it or not, if they're so inclined, most aren't, to hack their own university, to find new ways to introduce narratives and to be agents of change. This means, of course, that there need to be people who are pushing from the outside, always. And it also means there need to be people on the inside making sure that their voice is heard in ways where the university is designed to hear them. That is not enough, of course. but there need to be people pushing in both places. And that's where people can make really quite remarkable change. Now, many may dismiss that. That's just the words coming from a university president. I accept that charge. That's perfectly fine. But I do think there's a role for people coming into the machine, like R2-D2 was inside of the machine, and trying to find a way to redirect it towards the greater good. In that light, I mean, this is a perfect example, thinking of the climate change phenomenon that we're all navigating, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. This is where a university can be an incredible force for good. And I think public universities have the literal obligation and the moral obligation to deploy its expertise in ways that will make the world better, heal this very broken world. And in this regard, it's really exciting for me to be in a position to direct resources, secure resources to support our climate scientists, and to be in support of those coalitions that are working at Rutgers right now on a report about sustainability. And I'm looking forward to partnering with them. In fact, they were surprised when I met with a coalition of them this summer that they didn't have to argue with me on this case. They were surprised I wanted to listen to them and be part of a solution and not continue being the problem. Hacking the university requires that kind of mentality, hopefully done in collaboration, sometimes done by force. And I think that if we listen to the message that Professor Yang was offering to us, thinking in very creative, interdisciplinary ways and critical ways about the possibilities of the university to be an agent of positive change, sometimes against its own past practices, then we're at the place of real possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan Holloway. Let me invite back Professor Wayne Yang and then also Brent Stonefish to join us in this conversation so that we can actually open it up more and also set the platform for the coming 3 sessions to come. Wayne, would you want to respond with a set of comments, and then we'll kind of open the process up?
I'll try to keep mine quick. So thank you, Brent, for opening, and Professor Holloway, you told me to call you Jonathan, so I will. And thank you so much. And that was very generous of you. I saw lots of, so I know you had to ad-lib it, but I had to pre-record it, and I was squirming the whole time watching myself. Yeah, it's interesting, just the whole hacking thing. I guess one thing I want to say about it is, this idea of like the scalar actor, someone who could jump scale up and down. I do think the university and other systems, I saw a question in the chat, like beyond the university, they're all connected, right? That is something that I'm really interested in. I know that we had one of the readings from beforehand about, I think it was from Professor Kopp, I think, who actually, I didn't know that he was going to talk about scale, but he talked about climate change and scale, and he talked about university as a scale bridger. And I think that this is sort of the type of hacks that we need. I also think that, the connection between, I really appreciate the connection between Blackness and indigeneity that's being made, because these aren't the only relationships that matter, but these are these relationships between Black and Indigenous communities and peoples and histories illuminate sort of the foundational issues with how capitalism has just devoured and created the situation we're in. And just one thing about UC San Diego, no, the campus, UCSD Campus Black Forum is no longer there, but there are other things. So now we have a Black Resource Center. I was gonna talk about Black Like Water, which is a new initiative. It's all sort of place-based approach to Black student recruitment and retention that is connected to land and water and indigeneity. So there are some things, but when I got there, it was 0.5% Black students.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it's now 2.6, which is nothing to brag about. So there is a lot of things to do with this. This work is there's so many things to fight, and I guess I'll just end my comments by saying, I was listening to this podcast by Anna Elizabeth Johnson. She actually graduated from as a marine biologist with her PhD from UC San Diego, but she has got a great podcast with I want to say Alex Bloomberg, and it's called How to Save a Planet. And they do one on Black Lives Matter and climate change. And one thing she says is, you know, I'm working on an existential threat of climate change, and yet I have to be distracted, and she uses distracted, by another existential threat, which is anti-Blackness, right? And so how these things are, you know, so we're always trying to find ways to bring these things together. And I feel like, you know, Brent's opening about putting us in relation, you know, Kishala Mukwang, I think, is what, you know, the creator thought us into existence for the Lenape people. Just bringing it back there and bringing it back to our obligations to the, you know, to creation. I think that is where our relations really lie. So thanks.
I did want to add a note that those who are joining us through Facebook Live, unfortunately for Wayne's hack, the recording audio did not come through, but we will make this presentation available online, so you can watch it again and hear it. Let me push a little bit harder, since it's rare to have a president and a provost in the same space, but also with Brent Stonefish here, who is deeply knowledgeable about relations to the land. If we take the IPCC report seriously, which now says that we have 10 years, minus 10 years and counting, minus that time, every second, every minute, every day, before the cascading impacts of global warming that appear to be random begin to accelerate and combine. Clearly, this past COVID period, but also this past summer with the hurricanes and also the fires that have been raging, not just in this country, but also internationally, the droughts that are happening, that there's very little time, so that the usual university time is to think about becoming a major, graduating, making a change once you become a professional. But it doesn't seem that we have that luxury. So how can we begin to actually have part of what we do focused on responding to the immediate crisis?
Well, I'll just offer some quick thoughts. I mean, you're exactly right. Universities operate in a different kind of time. Time scales are much slower generally at universities. My experience has been, to date though, that if something is deemed of critical importance, a motivated university can move very quickly, and usually in smaller ways. I mean, not something at the scale of climate change, but this is really about the will. So I think we've arrived at a moment, well, I think we've been at a moment where we need people in administrations who are willing to occupy this very complicated space. And Wayne, for using first names, said as much during his recorded comments that yes, he's a provost, and also he's within the administration. He's in the belly of this machinery. How do you make sense of these sort of at least on the surface conflicting kind of spaces? I just think that we are at the moment where people who really can speak with the kind of clarity and urgency that we heard in Wayne's presentation, they have a critical role to play within the administration. That could be very uncomfortable, I think, for many people. And I think if they are in the administration can speak truth, I mean, in a sense, there's always another power you're speaking truth to, but stand up in the public space and say, we need to change our priorities and our timescales, then universities can start doing these things. And this is part of what I was saying by there need to be people on the outside and on the inside. I made the choice in my life. I'm on the inside, and that's just what that is. And boy, it's so much easier if I have a partner on the inside so I'm not alone doing whatever the work is in front of me. Then you can start, it doesn't take that many people, frankly, if you're in the right position to start pushing hard. So I think that's part of it. And I think and part of it is a willingness to stand up and speak publicly, which comes at great personal risk these days, I think.
Brent, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, you know, I was a director of Indigenous services at one of the universities for about a year, and they were doing indigenizing the university, and so they went through the whole rigmarole of doing the research, reaching out to community, reaching out to the students, reaching out to First Nations communities in the area, and they came out with a document about indigenizing the university. And they had a set of recommendations. And so it came to the point of implementing. And I happened to come into the role when they were starting to implement, or starting to look at how do we implement. And having conversations with the provost at the time, we had this conversation where, okay, it went through Senate, it went through all the things, it was ratified, we're going to indigenize the university, and here is your champion. And they introduced a non-Indigenous white scholar as our champion. And so I pushed back and I said, so in Canada, we had in our First Nations reserves, we had Indian agents. I said, so you've assigned an Indian agent for us. And the provost didn't like that, of course. And so we had a meeting, and she said she went through the recommendations and realized that to indigenize the university was to change the university at its very foundation.
That's right.
That the university was built by non-Indigenous white settlers on a foundation that they brought with them. So she had the challenge now of how do we do this? How do we do this? And so you talk about subversion, and you talk about people coming in and being those champions within the institution and having partners outside the institution. You're right, because it's like, if you don't have the very people that maintain the foundation, that have the willingness to change, then it's not going to work. It's not going to work. You have to have that will. And that goes right back to our creation story, where Kishala-Mokwang, the one who thought us into existence, gave humans free will. All the rest of creation were given a set of plans, and they do it every day. We're the only ones that were given free will. And so how do we channel that free will to be a part of the rest of creation, to be in a harmonious relationship with our climate, with our environment?
May I jump in about the whole time and urgency thing? So, universities can move really fast, and we're doing that right now with this COVID-19 pandemic response. Our university, we've moved incredibly fast. We are testing potential, I forgot what it's called now, inoculations and the vaccines, yes. And we've moved incredibly fast. And so the university we tend to think in very slow scales. So, and I think the university can do that as well. We think in terms of our students. So we could train our students around climate change, and then 20 years from now, someone will be doing something. And I think both have to happen. So when people talk about, Indigenous feminists talk about scale jumping, they're talking about jumping time scales too. I think I'm really excited by this conference because, today we're opening it up, but you got people who are doing this work. So I'm really excited about, obviously, Roderick Ferguson. Winola Duke is an economist as well. So she has economic solutions, and economic pressures also help drive universities and other efforts. But like Max Liberon is, I think, one of these super scale jumper, a scale actor, and has so many projects from big to small. And I think what, you were saying, Brent, about this ties to what Jonathan was saying about who is sort of in some ways threatening to the foundation of these kinds of institutions. So yeah, to indigenize, indigenous people are threatening to the foundation of the university, and so are Black people, right? And this is, I remember, I think Max Leron has this project called the Discard Studies, where she studies like everything that is thrown away, right? And this idea that things are thrown away, they're actually being put in a place, right? And it's drawing from like Mary Douglas, this idea of matter out of place. Like you're not supposed to have dirt in your kitchen, right? You're supposed to sweep that up and put it somewhere else, right? But dirt in the kitchen is threatening to the very order of things. And so I think that's like a very cyborg thing, like that the water is poisoned. And so when the water refuses to be poisoned, so we have people from Newark, Saber and other folks who are going to talk about the work they're doing. When the water refuses to be poisoned, and that's people refusing and the water refusing, that is threatening to the very order of things. And that can operate on fast scales and slow scales. So I just, we can move towards climate solutions. We can't say like we're going to teach our students. We shouldn't just be saying that and they're going to fix it one day. We have to forward these solutions today in partnership with communities and whoever else.
I guess I want to push a little harder, which is that we can do this potentially with the leadership. It's also a question of arriving at a moment in which both of you are now grappling with dramatic budget cutbacks and there's no money. What can be done without money? And how can you be thinking about the future and doubling down on the commitments that on these kinds of questions at the same time and trying to keep the university going? It's a very difficult problem.
It is difficult. I think it's in assembling the landscape of answers that are out there. I believe that there are answers that require a lot of money. I mean, tons of money, and that there are answers that are really about culture change. And culture change is exquisitely difficult. But if we do not signal, and I'll put myself in that really first person pro, if we do not signal a willingness to ask difficult questions on these topics, if we don't signal a willingness to do the small things that are basically even sometimes free about changing expectations, so on and so forth, the big expensive things won't have a place to land eventually because there's no culture ready to move in that way. So I think one has to be very pragmatic about trying to do both at the same time. And that's, not to get deep into the weeds there, but, that's part of what, my job and other people's jobs at the university is to raise funds for initiatives so we can find the money on these topics. But I do think one has to think of a whole suite of different ways to move quickly and then prepare for the future at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. We do have some questions coming in. We've got a large audience joining us. I just want to make sure we're asking a couple of what they're chatting in. One of them is for President Holloway. Is it ethical, consistent with the commitment to climate justice, while at the same time for the university to be investing in coal, oil, and gas corporations?
It's a great question. I won't have the specific numbers, but I do know that in there was a process related to divestment, and I believe our holdings are below 6% and going down in this area. So the short answer is I hear you loud and clear, and that I believe this fall the petition about divestment in these areas is being heard, and the university is going to be out of this space soon. It'd be inappropriate to say what the timescale is because I don't know literally, but we're heading in that direction, I think, pretty quickly, and I'm certainly supportive of that.
Thank you. Another question comes from Chicago, which is the whole question of how universities, of course, have to greatly change within themselves, but part of that change also has to be the relations it develops, the right relations, as Wayne has put it, with communities. and with the civic organizations that are outside of the walls of the university. So that change is clearly not going to happen sufficiently without those kinds of meaningful connections. And we can't simply talk about clearly service learning as the all-purpose solution in which some simple process of getting credits and doing something for a semester happens. What are your thoughts about that? Both President Holloway, but also Provost Yang, please.
You want me to take the first go?
Sure.
So I'll tell sort of a story, I guess. So I mean, we could work with the community, and universities always do and always have, and that doesn't mean it's a right relationship, right? And I think that, you know, like Brent greeted us in language of this territory. And I think, so I'm actually learning Kumeyaay language, Ipai language right now. My professor is Dr. Stan Rodriguez. I'm back enrolled in community college. I'm making use of the remote environment. And so the Kumeyaay, and I decided to do that because I felt like wherever I go, I try to learn a little bit of the language of that land. And I want to learn my responsibilities to that land and to the people in those places. And I want to be receptive to the original instructions of that land. I'm not there yet, I'm trying real hard, but you know, Brent had greeted us in language, and in the Ipai language here, the word for hello or greeting is hauka. And hauka means, I think hau comes from hau, which is soul, and it means the fire inside you. So hauka means I see the fire in you, right? It's an acknowledgement of your spirit and your soul. And it reminds me of something Winona LaDuke said, which is, you know, we are all sacred spirits on this line, you know, Brent, President Holloway, myself, all the people on this line, but what do we do to feed and nurture that sacred spirit? Because that is our relationship to the land, this place, and this universe, into creation. So I actually think we have to do a lot of unlearning to actually learn how to be in right relation. We can't just jump in with solutions that, you know, are really colonizing solutions. Like, I'm not opposed to service learning, but you know, there is a way in which it has been implemented many times as a very colonial project in Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities. So, I do think how we enter these relations matter, and we also have to enter with an acknowledgement of what privilege, power, and resources we have, and those privileges, powers, and resources, as I think we've all said, we've inherited through you know, very much colonial apparatuses. So we have to be honest about those things so that we can redeploy them. I think that's hard work, but it can be done, I guess, at the speed of trust.
At the speed of trust, that's powerful. Yeah. No, I think Rutgers University is located in New Brunswick, New Jersey, Camden and Newark, New Jersey, all of which are cities in different phases of whatever their life cycle happens to be. Newark in particular, Rutgers Newark has been doing wonderful work, being a good, I mean, each of our campuses, we are committed to being good citizens. Rutgers Newark, of the three, I think has really done the most so far in this regard, been an exemplar in recognizing that being a citizen is not just about service learning. Again, I'm not opposed to it, but Wayne's exactly right about its complications. But it, you know, goes down to the people who live in that city who may not have a relationship necessarily to Rutgers in this case, but they may be a potential vendor for the university. And this is where Newark, Nancy Cantor has been really quite strong in making sure that the Newark campus is really quite advanced as far as finding local vendors, and in this case, largely minority and I think women-owned vendors as well, to resource the university. That is but one way that universities can play an important critical as being a good citizen that goes beyond the feel-good exercises of service learning into things that are really about putting resources in other people's hands so they can manage their lives. So that's one example, and I do think Newark is setting the tone for the rest of the university in that regard.
Well, Unfortunately, we're running out of time. This is kind of the beginning of a longer conversation, and I wish we could keep on going. I just want to make sure that Brent, who is joining us just after eye surgery, so besides being very cool, those shades are also protecting the glare of the screen from his surgery. So, Brent, would you like to say a few words in closing? And then I wanted to say a number of words of thanks to all the people who've made this conference possible, and to ask people to tune in tomorrow and to Saturday. So, Brent.
Yeah, I would just like to say chota nishik to Jonathan and Wayne for everything that you've said, and it definitely speaks to hope in people within the institutions that have a willingness to change, and that have a willingness to have a conversation with those outside the university, and bringing that within the walls. And yes, it's definitely from my eye surgery yesterday that I have the sunglasses on right now. But yeah, it's just it's amazing that to hear a provost and a president to utter those words, and now it's watching those words to be turned into action. And I think that's one of the biggest things that needs to happen next, is that the words need to go right into action, and that you bring along those community partners, and like I think in New Jersey and New York, like you do have 2 state recognized Lenape groups in New Jersey, New York. You have the Ramapo, and then you have the Nanticokes, and then you also have the other Lenape communities across Turtle Island that that we have close connection right to that area. Being in Ontario, we talk about diaspora and how we were forcibly moved, and for 300 years we ended up in Ontario, and we have relatives that end up in Wisconsin and Kansas and Oklahoma. So and even as far as California. So it's one of those, it's so layered, but it's all about relationships. The simplicity of it all is it's about building relationships going forward with each other and with the land that we reside on.
Well, thank you so much, Brent, and thank you so much, President Holloway. Thank you so much, Provost Yang. Let me just say a few words of thank you, but also acknowledgement that so much research has to be done. I'm associated with a project that is now starting to identify sites in which massacres of Lenape peoples happened. And in fact, we believe we found the actual site in which the Pavonia massacre happened, in which Governor Kiff, during the Dutch period, in which he waged war against the Lenape peoples and basically instituted the system in which Dutch farmers began to occupy lands and become farmers of those lands in the way that the British had already been doing elsewhere. And that research, surprisingly, hasn't been done. So it's something that I think we can do, and we're doing in collaboration with the Munsee Lenape peoples. So more to come, but just to say that it's wide open, and that it's clear that the research we do with the right relationships can really begin to bear lots of benefits for our students, for the faculty, for our sense of where we are, and also for, of course, the original peoples of this land. Let me just say a few words of thank you. I want to first of all say thank you to Barbara Lee, who is the outgoing Senior Vice President, who's been someone with a lot of authority and holding many keys, and she was willing to open this door for me to have this conference. So I really am deeply appreciative. She and Isabel Nazario and the fantastic staff that I'll be naming later on in the conference have been marvelous to work with. I also want to acknowledge Dean Jan Lewis, who was the dean who hired me and has since passed away, but she is also one of those people who opens the door and does not keep control of the power that she has, but actually was willing to kind of share it. Also Nancy Cantor, the chancellor of our university at Rutgers at Newark. I'm so happy to be working with her, but also that you will be hearing her directly tomorrow. She'll be responding to Rod Ferguson's hack. It's not very often that university presidents and university chancellors are willing to respond to these kind of provocations that are actually challenging the very nature of how universities were formed and still operate to this day. So I want to thank President Holloway, but also Nancy Cantor in advance for being willing to do that. And also I want to thank Mary Sue Price, who is the life partner of Clement Price and has been advising me and helping me in understanding the kind of role that I should play and can play in the great city of Newark and the great campus of Rutgers at Newark and in the region. And there are many more people I want to thank, but I'll be thanking them along the way. And I want to thank you all for joining us. This is just the beginning of the first of 4 sessions. 2 are tomorrow. If you go onto the link that's in the program, you can see what is to come and also the acknowledgements that we've been making at the Price Institute. Also the ways in which you could look at readings and links to find out more. And hopefully these are helpful. I should also say that we really want to hear from all of you and would love to get your thoughts about the kinds of hacks that really should be happening at our campuses. I'm not just talking about courses, I'm also talking about how things are done and how we can start moving towards really grappling with these enormous issues that are facing all of us. And we're not just talking about our immediate region, of course we are, but we're also talking about all the connections that the people on our campuses, both staff, students and faculty, have to other parts of the world. So we're really trying to tackle this, not just in our little area, but also, of course, we have to be thinking globally. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Tomorrow, we will continue this exploration and dive deeper. Winona LeDuc will be with us tomorrow. She, as has been mentioned, is really one of the leading thinkers and doers around the question of how can we grapple with a just and graceful transition. Please tune in for that, and also then for Rod Ferguson's hack in the afternoon. And I should say that on Saturday is really the culminating event in which we've invited emerging scholars and organizers and policy folks who have already had a big impact. Max Libéron has been mentioned, but also a number of other people will be joining us. You'll see them on the schedule and their biographies. And a number of people who are community-based and based in the city of Newark doing civic work are also joining us to give comments back. And we're really hoping to make cluster hires during this period of cutbacks, hires in which we can begin to establish Native American Indigenous studies, but really with a focus on basically Indigenous local knowledge and how that is essential for us to begin to combat global warming and climate change. So by reaching back, we actually have solutions for the immediate future, and that we have no time really to simply wait for that to happen. As we heard in the case of San Diego, the enrollment has dropped dramatically for African Americans. And I would say that this is probably true nationally in terms of the kinds of participation of people of color, especially Black and Indigenous people, in universities. So we're not talking about some steady natural increase in progress. We're talking about dramatic cuts that are reflective of the kind of pulling back in the promises that this nation has made in the past. So with that, I just want to say thank you all for joining us, and thank you again, Provost Yang, President Holloway, and also Brent Stonefish. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.